I was...
wait just a minute, because it doesn't... Okay, now start.
The family used to go up sooner than I did because it's Strawberry, because Dad would would take the family up early enough to plant a spring crop, but I didn't get to go up usually until June on account of, I was in normal school at Kentby. And the way I had to arrive at Strawberry, there was no transportation. The best transportation was to go to Prescott on the train. And over Fossil Creek Canyon, a mailman would ride every day with the mail, or not every day, I'm sure, twice a week probably. And I'd go up on the day that the mailman would pick me up at Camp Verde. From Prescott, I'd have to take a stage and go to Camp Verde. And the mailman there would bring a saddle horse from the ranch, and I would ride it back with him. We'd ride all day long. And for the first ride, that really is something. It'd practically have to lift me out of the saddle when I'd get home. But it was fun. Some of the mailmen through the years were, entertaining, like your bus drivers, and others would say practically nothing unless you ask them a question. Some of them were so shy. But they're typical cowboys. And I would ride to the ranch in that fashion. Our principal entertainment all summer. Of course, we all had housework to do and things like that, but we had lots of leisure time. On account of my sister being a pretty girl and older and could sing and so forth, and my sister had a way of usually having a chum as a house guest. So it was a gathering place for the cowboys all summer. Anytime after 5 o'clock, they began concentrating over there, and there'd be a sing practically every evening around sundown, but they used to break up around 9 o'clock. And whenever there was a horse that was being tamed and broken, they would mostly ride him for the first time in the corral, a big corral, and we'd climb up on it was a log, that kind of a log constructed corral, and we'd sit up on top of the high corral and watch the cowboy break the horse. My father, being a lover of animals and kindness in his heart, detested the way the cowboys break a horse. The minute they get on him, they start whipping him, spurring him, and they always just want them to know who's the boss. That's the whole idea. They even bite their ear when they put the saddle on them. That one cowboy that's holding the horse by a halter, bites his ear while they're putting the saddle blanket and the saddle on the horse. It's some time before they put a bridle on him, because you imagine that big old iron thing in your mouth. It's like your new set of false teeth, I guess.
Worse.
So often there was that kind of a task to be done, and sometimes they don't ride a horse to exhaustion the first time, because sometimes the horse is submissive. If the horse is real intelligent, he'll understand that somebody's just trying to show him who's the boss, and that's the whole idea. About a city block away, there was an adorable little log cabin schoolhouse. Had an organ. Somehow or other, these people always seem to have music equipment. Organs were the thing in those days. And so we would dance down there, because both Lorena and I could play play the organ, and even if we didn't do anything but play chords to their singing, but we could play enough so that we could dance. And sometimes we'd have a fiddler, and fiddlers, what they were, they knew a few seesaw tunes, and there's a certain twang that they get to that violin that I don't know whether accomplished musicians can do it or not. I really don't. But this is part of the recreation, was whenever there was at least 8 of us was to dance, because we usually did a lot of square dancing, occasional waltz, but it was mostly quadrille work, quadrille dancing. About 20 miles up on top of the Moki Rim is Long Valley, and they had a nice schoolhouse and a store. It was a bigger schoolhouse. The one in Strawberry was a little one-room affair. I mean, just the size of one, about the size of an ordinary dining room or so forth, not even always as big as your parlor in your house. But at Long Valley, there was a bigger schoolhouse and more people, which made it more fun. And we always took some refreshments. We usually made sandwiches before we left home, or took the makings of sandwiches, and cakes. Hardly ever, more cookies occasionally. And then it seemed to me like we mostly had lemonade. There was some pop in bottles, but nothing like what it is today. And it seemed like I remember mostly lemonade, and you could buy different flavorings too in packages, things like that, but it was minimum. But evidently we could always get lemons and oranges from the stores. And this would be being the majority of Mormon people in that area, they didn't always have coffee, although when there were a lot of cowboys, well, the cowboys drink coffee anyway. It's necessary for them to stay awake on night watch and all that sort of thing, and they have a habit of drinking coffee even when they're Mormons. All the Mormons don't abstain. The really Orthodox Mormons abstain from coffee. But we would we'd like to dress up for those kind of dances, and we would roll up a long dress, and sometimes it was just a long skirt, depend on what kind of a nice blouse you had on, But you'd take a fresh blouse and a long
Roll it up and put
skirt,
it on
and you'd fold it up and tie it in your slicker behind your saddle. Nobody in the summertime there went any place without a slicker because of summer showers, rain, and we just fold it up and fold it in the slicker and tie it behind the saddle. Well, they're just oiled. They used to always be yellow. Oiled something or other, real oily.
Not plastic like that.
No, they didn't have plastic in those days. But we'd take a little vanity along, and maybe a rose for your hair. Seemed like we used to always wear a rose or a bow in your hair, or a ribbon. That seemed to be part of the dress up. And we would dance all night long and start home at sunup. And the trip home, nobody talked. And the horse knew the way. Just give him his head and he'd take you home after the dance. We found the cowboys very refreshing. They were always so courteous. A woman was absolutely on a pedestal. And there
were no wallflowers, were there?
And never any wallflowers. A cowboy danced with everybody. If you were even the 12-year-olds that 12 and 13 years old that'd get, well, the whole families always came to the dances, and the babies were put to sleep in the cloakroom, you know. They made a little bed for them on the floor, mostly with the coats and little cover-up, and where they could be watched. But everybody got to dance. The grandmothers and the great-grandmothers and the teenagers, no matter how young they were, they learned to dance very, very young. I guess those people teach the children just come to the dances, you know, and they just learn automatically, like they learn to walk. Now, these summers up there, and we felt like it was a tragedy that Lorena, our oldest daughter, married one of the cowboys, and she had a very hard life. A cowboy. The heartbreaker was that she was engaged to a very wonderful young man in Mesa, who was brokenhearted. She was wearing his ring, and he was brokenhearted. He just couldn't believe it when she sent his ring back. He just couldn't believe that she would choose a life like that. And she had goodness, she just lived in a little old homestead shack up there, and there was times when in later years that her life was really hard. She was alone so much, you know, just like the prairie mothers that in the early days, that because part of the time her husband he did manage and run some cattle, mostly for his father, and he began accumulating it, but he really had nothing but an occasional job, I mean substantially, and he used to be one of the mail carriers even over to Camp Verde, and he worked. He was a good worker, and he was smart, I mean intelligent, but he had the equivalent of about probably grammar school education. He was a good dancer.
Probably was younger.
Oh, I don't know.
She was awfully young, wasn't she?
Well, she was 18, yes.
They were just out of the
She was 18 years old, and it was just a novelty up there, and well, I did tell you also, half of the fun of the summer was raiding somebody's cornfield or stealing their watermelons, and they'd have a little night party, a campfire someplace, but nobody objected to the young people helping themselves from their watermelon patch or their cornfield. And we roasting ears, you know, and have a party, night party, and it was quite a social life. They got, when they had a good gang, there'd be something doing every night. One of the pleasures, too, was if we had a guest or if new people came in, we'd always take them on a trip down to the Natural Bridge, which was 5 miles below Pine, or made it about 10 miles from Strawberry, but it made it about a half day's horseback ride. And of course, that's the only way we ever went anywhere. And the Natural Bridge was operated by some people from Scotland with the name of Goodfellow. They had one daughter and one son, and they were jolly, very jolly, stalwart, beautiful people. And the daughter finally was going to school to Tempe at the same time that I was. In fact, the summer after I graduated, I think she was about a year ahead of me in school. Lilius was her name, Lilius Goodfellow. And she and Edith Mullen and I were the ones who went to Berkeley the year of the San Francisco Exposition, 1915. And we went to Berkeley to summer school, and one of the reasons we chose that for summer school was the fact that the World's Fair was over in San Francisco across the bay. So it made it a real beautiful, wonderful summer, and The year before that, I had come to Flagstaff for the summer, and that's when there were 4 Flagstaff boys who all came to San Francisco.
You'll tell us about that.
And, yeah,
This is
Joe Babbitt was among them. Every summer, we would make jerky. They would kill a beef. You know, the big problem up there with killing meat is flies. And we'd buy mosquito netting, you know, that mosquito bar netting. And the animals would have to be hung up, and they would always have to be covered, you know, to keep the flies. And of course, we didn't have refrigeration, but we'd have to protect. Most everybody had some little screen porch that was, you know, screened in, and we were very, very cautious about flies, because any time a horse got a barbed wire cut, sometimes they didn't discover it until it was contaminated, you know, and they just get worms, and it seems like those worms just come overnight when the flies get to them. We were always having to doctor a horse. That's why I hate barbed wire fences. I've always hated them, because I've seen so many animals cut up because a horse will fight when they get tangled in them, and they don't understand them, of course. But anyway, back to the jerky. The meat would be cut in strips and small pieces, and it had to be boiled in very, very salty water, brine, absolute brine, and then we'd lay it out to dry, and of course have to keep it. Yes, we boiled the meat, and until it was done.
I didn't realize that jerky was cooked. I thought it was raw meat. I thought it was covered.
You have to dip it. Maybe they didn't boil it hard, you know, but it was dipped, at least in brine. I don't know the timing of it, because I didn't participate in it. I just know that Mother was always helping, and Dad and the older people. Sometimes they'd have some of the cowboys helping, you know, working on it. But after it was dipped, it had to be hung up. You know, they'd string it, hang it out until it was completely dried out. No, it was sliced first. Sliced first. That's about the only way you could handle it, because it would be too thick. No. We had on the homestead, the Chandler homestead, we had we always had a smart cat, smart dogs, and everything else. But we used to have to trap the gophers, because they really wreck your irrigation if there's a lot of gopher holes. Well, your irrigation water all goes down all the gopher holes. But whenever Dad would catch a gopher in a trap, he had this pet cat that always went along with him, and he'd give the cat to the gopher. And sometimes the cat, instead of just killing the gopher right away, he'd play with him for a while, you know, and they'd box back and forth. And it was just, maybe this is part of a cat's nature. I don't know. And he'd eventually, of course, eat the gopher. But usually he'd play with him for a while first. Yes, and the cat, after Grandpa would give him the gopher.
He'd play with him if it was alive. The gopher was already dead.
Sometimes the cat would go over and purr and hunch his back and rub his back against. And rub his back against Grandpa's leg to thank him for the gopher. Yes, he usually did it. This particular cat did. He was a real special Angora cat.
Social life.
Socially we went. We were never. I had this stepfather since I was 4 years old, and we loved him so. We idolized him because he was the measure of all men to us. We compared every man to him. And, of course, he was born and raised a very, very strict Catholic. We were always conscious of that. Well, the best man we knew was a Catholic man, you know. He wasn't a Mormon man. But he was the biggest and the smartest and the most efficient and the strongest, and he was just the best, the world's best, and he was a Catholic. It seems to me that I have always been a Catholic since I had a stepfather, since although he never really taught us a religion, but he was so fundamentally good. I mean, he didn't teach us the catechism and or anything like that. He made no attempt. We went to the Mormon church with our mother, and socially we went with the Mormon people. But we always felt a little bit aloof. We felt a little bit superior that we knew a religion that was superior and better. And I don't know, but it seems to me that I've always been a Catholic ever since I was 4 years old, because then when I went to boarding school, I had a Catholic roommate, Dorothy Tamburino. I should tell something about Dorothy. She was what life she had. Her greatest happiness was with us. I don't know whether I have another tapes or not, have I?
No, you haven't.
Well, anyway, she was a very devout Catholic, and her mother was a widow who had raised a family, and she had a sister who was taking nurses training in St. Joseph's Hospital, and it was this sister who was putting Dorothy through school. And Dorothy and I used to sew together. She, you know, to help. We'd make ourselves fresh new little summer dresses. Even in the dormitory, we'd make them by hand and wear dresses that we'd make. But we had a very devoted companionship during our school years. But back to this Catholic business. But all the time I was in boarding school, I went to church with Dorothy all the time. I never went to the Mormon church except when I was, if I was in Mesa on weekends. Sometimes I'd go back, go home for weekends. But from the time I was 4 years old with a Catholic stepfather and in boarding school with a Catholic roommate, it's no wonder that I picked out a Catholic man to marry and raised my family Catholics. The way I felt, I have great admiration for the Mormon people. They're stalwart, and they live really a socialistic life. They live a community life, and there's nobody in need in a Mormon community, because, well, they just see to it. They take care of each other, and they live that kind of a community existence. They're concerned with each other, and they're very admirable people. But the more I knew and grew up with the Catholic religion being demonstrated in the lives of the people that were close to me, I thought, well, there's no excuse for the Mormon church. They have a claim that the gospel really, on account of the wickedness of the people and so forth, was taken from the earth and restored through Joseph Smith. And I couldn't see any difference between the Christianity that I was taught in the Mormon church and the Christianity that the Catholic church, and it was always here, it was never gone. It never seemed to me like there was any excuse for the Mormon church to be. That claim, I felt, didn't have foundation. Not that they were good Christians. And there was always one thing in the Catholic Church that appealed to me, that they claim every Christian who believes in the divinity of Christ, believes in God and the divinity of Christ, the Catholic Church claims they belong to the soul of the Church. And so I tease them. Even now, I tease my brothers who don't go to church and say, as long as you believe in God, and I know you do, you wouldn't live the kind of life you do. We claim you anyway. You know, there's that little old thing about how snobbish socialites draw a circle, you know, and leave you out of it. But the Catholic Church draws a circle and takes you in.
What is that?
Grandfather Passy lived, had a homestead, a farm north of Mesa. Right now, that whole section is, well, anyway, it was close to the big canal that was brought through, and of course those canals, yes,
North Evergreen now?
Well, the thing that was named North Evergreen was Dad Shuley's vineyard place. When we sold that, we sold it to developers who made a residential area and named it North Evergreen. That was Dad Shuley's ranch. The Passy Ranch was a little bit farther to the west, and it wasn't as developed. See, Dad Shuley had vineyards and orchards and so forth on his, and the Passys had a few trees close to the house, like peaches and apricots and figs. Lots of big fig trees. They seem to thrive down there, and even today, I just love fig jam. We always made jam out of the figs. But the Passy Ranch was on the opposite side of the canal. The Shuley Ranch was on the north side. And there was a neighbor to the east that had a big orange grove, and Dad Shuley was in business partnership with him because he was a kind of an Easterner trying to be a Westerner, and Dad Shuley was, he was superintendent. Well, it's one reason, I guess, that they went in business together, because Dad could be the manager, you know, and he knew a lot more about growing things. But Mr. Bowen was his name, and his place was mostly orange groves, and ours was mostly vineyards, seedless grapes where we made raisins. It was most interesting to live there because we not only had some alfalfa fields and made hay that fed all the horses, but we had making the raisins was very interesting. They'd have a whole colony of Indians, Pimas, Maricopas, come in and do the picking of the grapes when they were ripe, and the bunches of grapes were spread out as much as you could spread a bunch without breaking it up on wooden trays in between the rows of grapes, and they laid there in the sun until they were dry, and then another tray would be laid on top, and it would be flipped over, so the grapes were turned over and dried on the other side. And when they were thoroughly dry, they were taken to what they called the sweat house. It would soften and moisten them up again, and then they were run through a little machine, a mill, that would tumble them off the stems, and then the stems, there was a blower that would blow the stems off, and then the raisins were ready for packaging, and they were marketed, sold to the grocery stores around, and it was all, to me it was very fascinating, the whole little manufacturing process. Yes, it was just a funny little thing. Uncle Bill was about 3, I guess, so that made me about 5 years old. But in the summertime, we all slept on cots out under the orchard trees and the yard trees. We had big umbrella trees, in the yard, and cottonwood trees and big fig trees on the bank of the canal, and then a whole orchard of peach and apricot trees. Well, we'd pick a good dense shady spot, and usually under the umbrella trees is where we had our cots in the summertime. Everybody had these, it's just camp cots we used, and we slept out of doors all summer long.